But yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for organising it. And oh, I'm being told. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was just in the way. Yeah, thank you to Lee as well for coming over. Really appreciate that. It's a big effort. I know a lot of people have come from a long way, but at least come all the way from Colorado. Well, Wyoming, he's been just telling me, so it's a long way. So I really appreciate it. And I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the farm. And I know a lot of people will probably know. Oh yeah, Ursula, how do we turn this on? Is it? There you go. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about the farm itself. You've probably been to a few of these things before, and you'll see some farmers stand up in front of a screen a bit like this, and they'll just reel off a few bullet points. So it'd be something that goes a little bit like this. We have about 130 suckler cows currently on the farm. We're expanding to about 250 to 300 suckler cows. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We have a spring calving block over about 12 weeks, of which 85% of those will be calved in 6 weeks, and 96% of those will be calved in 9 weeks, and the other 4% are really looking hard for an excuse for me to get rid of them. We use mob bulling techniques, so we're putting multiple bulls in with groups of cows to shorten the calving period and also improve conception rates. Everything is currently finished on farm as either steers, heifers or bulls. And we have an average weaning rate of around 280 kilograms with no calf creep fed at all. And that is from an average cow weight of 590 kilos. And everything is grazed out on rotational grazing. We're on daily moves with dry matter allocated based upon the percentage of a cow's body weight and its requirement due to the time of year. Sounds complicated, but it isn't. But I'm not really going to do that. I actually wanted to do something a little bit different. So I've got a bit of a captive audience. I don't often get to talk about cows, and I love talking about cows. So I wanted to give you a bit of a how behind the cow, a bit of a reasoning about some of the decisions that we've made on farm and why we do them. Because often I think you'll find that we tend to make decisions, and if we really delve into it, we don't really know why. So hopefully we'll just show you a few of the things that I think are really important behind the profitability of our herd, and it might get you just thinking a little bit differently. This is a great quote. I love quotes. I love a sort of a maxim and an idiom. I think they're fantastic ways of distilling huge amounts of information down into sort of pocket-sized chunks that you can just take away with you. I heard this one originally about 5 years ago from Aaron Nurbus, who's a Canadian rancher, and this is another Canadian rancher, Don Campbell. And he said that if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make big changes, you need to change the way you see things. And that's really stuck with me, and I'm hoping that when you leave here today, some of you might just look at things a little bit differently. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was, actually I'm going to have a bit of audience participation, because I know people are going to be cold and you might fall asleep. So every now and then I'm going to get you to stick your hands in the air, and just so I get a bit of a read of the room. So I just want to have a bit of an idea. People in this room, if you're a suckler cow farmer, what do you think your replacement rate is from your herd? So how many cows are you bringing in as a percentage of your whole herd in order to stay at the same level of animals? So I'll shout out some numbers, just stick your hand in the air. So anyone for like 8%? 10%? Anyone 12%? Yeah? Anyone 15%? Anyone 17%? Anyone higher than 17%? Right. What if I was to tell you that it's likely for most suckler herds to be about 20%? You'd probably think I was nuts. But realistically, I think if you're culling out for the reasons that you should be culling out for, you probably find that it's somewhere about there. And in order to do this, I'm going to demonstrate it. We're going to have a potential 100 breeding heifers. We're going to have a little bit of a fake farm here. 100, because 100% makes life easy for doing maths. What I would do, if I was looking at those 100 heifers, I'd want to pick out the ones that were fit for my system, phenotypically correct. So I would effectively be looking for the ones that were peas outside of the pod. Try and get rid of those. I think I'd probably find it quite easy to get rid of 6. So we take 6 out based on phenotype, and that'll leave me 94 left to pre-breeding check. Now, another hand in the air. Who does a pre-breeding check in here? So who's pelvic scoring and making sure everything's cycling? No, not too many, there's 3 or 4. So there's a rule in mathematics, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, and it says that you never multiply by 0. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to why you never multiply by 0? Because you always get 0. And there's nothing you can multiply by 0 to get anything other than 0. And I think a pre-breeding check is a fantastic way for a farmer to ensure that he's not multiplying by 0. You can take out so many animals that are just going to waste your time by giving them a pre-breeding check. So we pre-breeding check them, and I think we'd probably find another 6 out of that 94 that were bit tight on their pelvis or they weren't cycling, you didn't want them in the herd. And I think probably being pretty lenient there, which means you got 88 to be exposed to the bull. If we had 88 to be exposed to the bull, and we had a 96% conception rate, we'd have 4 empties. I think we could probably, hopefully, get a 96% conception rate from there if you put them in for sort of 6 or 12, 6, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, whatever. But you probably couldn't guarantee more than that. You'd like to think you could, but it's the way it is. I think when they come to calve, you'd probably have 4 problem animals, and you'd end up with 80 left to rebreed. And I would get rid of those 4 problem animals. I know there's a lot of people that would probably keep them, but I think we'd quite easily lose 20% of our potential animals there. Those 80 to rebreed, I know what you're thinking, well that's fine because that's heifers we're talking about, and we're not going to take any phenotypically incorrect animals out once we've already done it as heifers, and pelvic score's not going to be of interest to us after, you know, the first year. Well, yeah, that's true, but firstly, I think we'd probably just change those to other metrics. So we'd be taken out based on weaning weight, or we'd be taken out based on the fact, you know, we always have to suckle that one, so maybe we should get rid of that because its teats aren't quite right, or it's got bad feet. There's always going to be some reason to get rid of an animal. I always think as a suckler cow farmer, we're not really suckler cow farmers, we're just cull cow farmers. If you look after the cull cows, the suckler cows will look after themselves. So if we look at that over multiple years, I want to ask actually, before we start, who calves at 2? I know there'd be a fair few multipliers and stuff in this room, so everyone calving at 2, put your hands in the air. Anyone calving older than 2, sort of like 2.5 or 3? Yeah? Anyone calving older than 3? You might think I'm joking, but I saw some bulling heifers for sale once, they're 36 months old. Scared me to death. It's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. So if we have those potential bulling heifers at sort of 15 months old, calving at 2, we get 80 to actually get to calve. The next year, if we're taking out a 20%, we'd actually have 64 left in the herd. And then we'd have 51 left in the herd after 3 years, after 3 calves. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this line is? In the average UK suckler herd, it takes 3 calves, if you're calving at 2, to make a profit. Which means that if you're the average UK suckler farmer, 51% of your herd is carrying 49% that went before it. Which is quite a scary metric. Now those of you who calved at 3, I know you guys put your hands up, but there'll be some others that perhaps didn't. Those of you who calved at 3 might be thinking, well that's all right, because I can just move this line down 1 year. That doesn't work like that. If you calve at 3, that extra year costs you so much money in untold potential, as well as the fact that you've got another animal that's, you know, taking place of a productive animal. It actually takes you 2 more years to make a profit on those animals, which means that in your herd, the average would be 32% of your herd carrying the 68% that went before it. So actually, one thing I would urge people to do is look at calving at 2 if you don't already, because it can make an enormous difference to the baseline profitability of your farm. Another thing that we do differently to a lot of people is we do a lot of rotational grazing. So we do a lot of daily moves. We'll probably talk about this as we go around. And I think grazing is probably the most underutilised asset in agriculture. I think a lot of farmers would just put cows out to grass and just, you know, leave them out there, and that'll be that. They just sort of go, well, we'll come back in October, November, we'll bring them in, maybe take a bit of hay out when it starts to look a bit thin on the ground. But if you're an arable farmer, you know, and I'm not saying it's necessarily the best thing to be doing, but you'd be running GPS and automatic shut-off nozzles, and you'd be looking at every single thing to get every bit of production out of your farm. And I think we as graziers could probably do a lot more to improve our grazing. So I'm going to look at, this is grass growth on our farm, so I want to look at this and plot it out. If you're farming in Wales or further north, further south, it would be probably slightly different to this, but this is us on our farm. So we've got a bit of a 12-spoke cartwheel here, and it's the months of the year as we go round clockwise. So we'll plot this together. Grazing in January, there's not a huge amount of grass growth on our farm. And when we get to February, things will start to pick up. We're getting a bit longer days, a bit warmer, a bit more moisture about. And we get into March and things really start to motor. When we get into March, we're probably growing 20 to 25 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. And then we get into April, we get those longer days, it's warmer, those April showers, things really start to motor. And in May and June, we're really starting to grow a lot of grass. When we get to July, after the summer solstice, it starts to die back a little bit. We get a little bit of a flush sometimes in August, September, but we tend to utilise that in order to set ourselves up for the spring, for grazing again, so we can have an early turnout. And as we come around the rest of the year, grass growth really dies off. Now, we've moved our calving period from the 1st of March because of this, and I'll show you why. Okay, we're back. So yeah, as I was saying, we're going to now sort of plot cow requirement throughout the year. So again, I like to think the cow's year starts at calving, because it kind of does. So we'll put calving at the top and we'll work round. So at calving, cow wants a fair bit of food. You know, we're looking not necessarily at its max, and we'll explain that in a minute, but it wants a fair bit of food. We've got to carve this animal, we've got to be in the right condition to do it. After calving, we're going to now start to look towards feeding it a bit more, because we need to make sure that it's going to be cycling again, you know, recovered back, ready for bulling, and we've got a calf pulling on that animal now, so we've got to feed the calf too. A couple of months after calving, and again, that calf's getting bigger, it's having more of a drag, and we're really starting to get that rising plane of nutrition ready for bulling. The bull goes in, and hopefully the cow will be recovered and be in good condition. The calf's still pulling on it, but it should be pretty much there or thereabouts, ready to be bulled. And then as the calf gets a little bit older, it starts to take a bit more of its own grazing, so it has a bit of less of a pull on the cow. And when we get round to weaning, at about 7 months old, then it really drops off, because then all realistically we're doing is maintaining body weight within the cow. So we're grazing at what, like 1.5 to 1.8% of cow's body weight in dry matter a day. So we can really drop this down. So if I put those two things next to each other, can anyone kind of see what I see when you look at them together? What about if I do this? We've moved calving from the 1st of March to about mid-March, and it might move a little bit more to later on in March or even into April, so that we can calve in line with our grass growth on our farm. Effectively, we've got a very similar intake from the cow to the amount of grass that we're growing. So we want to be able to put our cows out to grass and utilize that spring grazing as best as possible. So we're effectively growing grass alongside cow requirement. We might move eventually to calving outside, which would be a very similar thing, but we'd be just putting it back a little tiny bit, effectively just to have grass to graze into. But that's something that we've looked at and thought, yeah, we need to just tweak things there, just to help us out in the spring a little bit. Now, as I mentioned, we rotationally graze. Now, how many people in this room do some sort of rotational grazing? Yeah, that's good to see. It's good to see. It's getting more popular, and I think it's really interesting when you look at why. So if you could increase your farm acreage by 50% for free, you would, wouldn't you? Like, I would. So these are some figures from our farm, and I wanted to just share them with you. So back on a set stocking system, we were growing about 6.5 tons of dry matter per hectare and utilising it at about 60%. So we're effectively using 3.9 tons of dry matter on every hectare of our farm. If we move to a rotational system, now this is, we effectively, this is not daily moves, this is on sort of, maybe you're putting them in for a week and then moving them to another field and bringing in mowing grass and such like and grazing the aftermath. You're going to increase the amount of grass you're growing because you're giving more rest to your animals, to your grazing. But you're still going to utilise it about 60% because you really, to up that utilisation, need to be looking at daily rotations. And the daily rotations, you might not be growing a huge amount more grass, but you will up your utilisation. So we're actually utilising about 7.3 tonnes of grass compared to the 3.9 tonnes that we would be on a set stock system. And at a relative equivalent feed cost of £300 per tonne of dry matter, on our farm over 180 hectares, that is an annual feed cost of £183,600. That's a huge amount of money. Does anyone want to hazard a guess, to finish off, how many extra cows that would be that we could run on our system, over set stocking? 122 cows, just by changing the grazing. It's a huge benefit to our farm, and I think more people should really look at doing it. And if you do want to improve your grazing, we've actually been part of precision grazing, and it's a fantastic thing to be part of. It's a really good group of people, really like-minded people, and they have some fantastic events. And we're like one of them higher up. There's different levels. We're pretty much at the top level, and we rated it at 20-1 return on investment last year, and it's averaged at a 16-1 return on investment. You can get 5% discount as well, so why not? And if you go to my website, bodysfarm.com, we've got some data sheets on there that I wanted to highlight for people. If you're looking at trying to improve your herd, you can put in, you can go on there, go onto the members area, sign up to be a member, download the data sheets for free, and you can put in all of your herd metrics, so like your birth weights, your weaning weights, your cow weight, and it will also automatically work out on this data sheet whether your animal is performing well. And if it's performing at less than 35% of the cow's body weight at weaning, it'll highlight that animal, so you can utilize it for maybe improving your culling. But yeah, is there any questions before I waffle on anymore? Say it again. We own all of our own bulls, yeah, so we own all of our own bulls here on farm. No, so when we're mob bulling, so we're putting big groups of cows together and putting multiple bulls in, and we keep those big groups of cows together because I don't want the work, to be honest. So yeah, we'll have a group of 60, 90 cows or whatever, and they're just in one group, and we'll just move them around as one group. And it makes life really easy because effectively you just go to one group, move it up, and that's your job done for the day. No, they all get on really well. I think it's something a lot of people are scared of, is putting bulls in with each other. But we find that they've always get on all right. You might get the odd one who just has a bit of a head rub, but it's never too much of a big deal. And especially if you mix them on the day that they go in with the cows, they're way too preoccupied to be worried about each other. So we find it works really well. And you do get like a dominance. You'll get a dominant bull, but the other bulls will still work in and around them, so it works fine. No, so again, multiplying by 0. Semen test your bulls, people. Please, just give them a check. Semen test your bulls. We semen test all our bulls every single year before they go in. And again, it's another thing when you're mob bulling. If you're putting multiple bulls in with a group, if you do for any reason, if one goes lame or something happens to one, you've got other bulls to pick up the slack. Whereas if you're in a system where you've got 30 bulls in, 30 cows in with one bull, if something happens to that bull, you're in a mess. So it's a really great way of just sort of covering yourself. So in that case, we don't at the minute because we've been running different breeds of bulls in with, so it's worked out all right, but we will be, yeah, moving forward, any potential breeding heifers would be DNA tested to make sure that we're not running them back breeding. Pretty much effective, we've always spring calved here. We've always calved at 2, we've always spring calved. And when you're on a grass-based system like we are, and we're trying to utilise as much grass as possible, there's a huge amount of work when you're awesome calving, because you effectively, I mean, a lot of people will be having them inside. There's a lot of bedding, a lot of feeding, a lot of work involved in that. Our stabilisers are in the shed over there, you've probably seen them. They came in yesterday and they'll go back out tomorrow. They're still outside grazing. We don't need to keep them in. So we can minimise the utilisation of machinery and sheds and everything else in infrastructure and really simplify it. There's an Elon Musk quote I love, and it's a bit weird, but he's got some good quotes. And he says that you should question every system and then simplify, simplify, simplify. So effectively work out whether you need to be doing it, and if you don't need to do it, don't do it. And if you do need to do it, make it as simple as possible, and that's what we're really trying to do. I think there is, but I think you'd have to be making a lot of supplementary feed. It's because like we were talking about cow requirement there, I didn't actually, to make it simple, I didn't put in the calf requirement. When we're looking at grazing, we make our calculations based upon the cow with the calf. So when it calves, it'll be like 2.5%. And then after a couple of months, it'll go up to 3%. And after about 4 months, it goes up to 3.5%. But if you're trying to feed 3.5% of cow's body weight in dry matter during the winter, you've got a lot of work, even if you are keeping them outside, to make sure that they've got enough grazing in front of them. And when you've not got that grass coming up behind them as well, there's not something to replace it. So you end up having to do a lot of the work yourself. So when they've weaned, the bull calves will go in and they'll be fed silage with cereal. Everything else, if it's inside, will be on just silage, just on the herbal lay silage. It's about 16.8% herbal lay silage, and they'll just stay on that until they go back out again. But we've tried out wintering this year with some heifers, and it didn't go very well. They kept breaking through the fences. We need some hot posts. They kept pushing on the posts because the posts aren't electrified and getting out, but they'll go back out grazing in February. We've got enough grass shut up ready for them to go. We're on really heavy clay, but because we are on moving daily and we're bale and rolling rather than grazing in situ, effectively we're not having the problems with poaching. And we'll also shut up grazing for the spring, so we're not eating into spring grass. So that grass has already been shut up since about September, ready for turnout. So most of the farm is in ring fence. So most of the farm is here. There's 32 acres up the village, the other side of the village, and then there's 70 acres that we own 5 or 6 miles away, which we use for summer grazing. But yeah, the rest of the farm is ring fenced here, which does make life really easy, I'm not going to lie. And people hate us because the actual buildings is pretty much bang in the middle of the farm. So we've just got one of those perfect little units, which makes it really easy for us to do. I sympathise with people that have a lot of outlying blocks. It does make things a bit more difficult.